My fiancé posted wedding planning photos captioned, "Imagine marrying someone who still thinks love matters more than lifestyle, faced with tears of joy, while secretly meeting another man during business trips." I stayed silent and canceled everything without explaining why. Months later, her entire family learned the truth after hotel security footage started circulating in their private group chat. Imagine marrying someone who still thinks love matters more than lifestyle, faced with tears of joy. I read it 3 times. Then I read it again. The photo was one I recognized. Lindsay at the venue we'd toured together 2 Saturdays ago, her hand resting on the back of a white Chiavari chair, champagne flute tilted toward the camera, smile wide and effortless. She looked beautiful. She always looked beautiful in photographs. That was never the issue. The caption sat underneath like something she'd typed fast and posted without thinking. 47 likes in 20 minutes. The comments were already rolling in. "Girl, say it louder. Why are some men like this, honestly? You deserve the world, babe. Who hurt you, LMAO?" And then Lindsay herself, replying to that last one. "Just tired of having to explain basic things to someone who should already get it by now." I put my phone face down on the kitchen counter. I didn't text her. I didn't call. I didn't screenshot it and send it to Austin with a string of question marks, even though every version of me from 2 years ago absolutely would have. I just stood there in our kitchen, in the apartment we'd been sharing for 14 months, and I looked at the coffee maker she'd picked out, and the throw pillows she'd arranged on the couch, and the save-the-date magnets still on the refrigerator from when we'd mailed the first round to family. Someone who should already get it by now. She was talking about me. That much wasn't subtle. We'd argued 3 nights before about the wedding budget, specifically about whether we needed a second photographer for the rehearsal dinner, which would cost an additional $1,800 on top of the $14,000 we'd already committed to the venue, the florist, the caterer, and the band she'd insisted on over the DJ I'd suggested. I'd said, "Let's think about it." She'd gone quiet in a way that wasn't really quiet at all. I didn't realize it then, not fully, but that moment changed everything. Not the argument, not even the post. It was the comments. Specifically, one reply she made to her cousin Tiffany, who had typed, "Some men just don't understand what you're worth." And Lindsay had responded, "Some do though." That emoji, that small, private, satisfied little emoji, aimed at no one in particular, visible to everyone. I picked my phone back up. I read it again, and I thought, she's not talking about me. Let me tell you what was at stake, because I want you to understand why I didn't just pack a bag and walk out that night. The venue deposit was $11,000, non-refundable after a certain date. We had crossed that date 6 weeks prior. The florist had a signed contract. The photographer, a woman Lindsay had followed on Instagram for 2 years before reaching out to her specifically, required full payment 30 days before the event. We were 8 weeks out. Most of that money was already gone. The apartment was in both our names. 18 months left on the lease. We had mutual friends who had already booked flights. Lindsay's mother had already bought her dress. My parents had flown in from Ohio for the engagement party and were planning to return for the wedding. Austin was my best man. He'd already written a speech. I knew this because he'd read me the opening line while we were watching football, proud of himself, asking if it was too much. I told him it was perfect. None of that was what stopped me from walking out, though. What stopped me was something colder and more deliberate than emotion. By the time I read that post, by the time I saw that emoji, that small curving satisfaction in a single punctuation mark, I had already been noticing things for weeks. Small things. The kind of things you file away without meaning to because your brain registers patterns before your heart is ready to. Lindsay's business trips had increased. She worked in corporate consulting, so travel wasn't unusual. But in the past 4 months, the frequency had changed. Chicago twice. Miami once. A quick overnight to Dallas she'd mentioned only in passing. Her phone had developed a new relationship with her hand. She used to leave it on the charger in the bedroom. Now it came with her everywhere. Into the bathroom, face down on the dinner table, tucked under her pillow when she slept. She had started wearing perfume on Sunday mornings when we had no plans. That last one sounds small. It probably sounds like nothing. But you have to understand, Lindsay was meticulous about her habits in ways most people aren't. She had a routine for everything. Sunday mornings meant coffee and reading and no makeup and certainly no perfume until at least noon. That was just who she was. The change wasn't dramatic. It was a degree off. A slight variation that shouldn't have registered. It registered. I told myself it was stress. Wedding planning was stressful. We were both stretched thin. I let it go. That turned out to be the wrong choice. Not because ignoring it made things worse, but because the truth was already in motion, completely independent of whether I was paying attention. If you enjoy real stories like this, subscribe, because what happened next changed everything for me. I'm 31. At the time of all this, I was 30, working as a financial analyst at a mid-sized firm in Manhattan. Not flashy, comfortable. I'd been with Lindsay for 4 years, engaged for 11 months. The wedding was set for late May. Lindsay was 29. We'd met through mutual friends at a birthday party in Brooklyn. She was sharp, funny, ambitious in a way I respected. We made sense together, or I thought we did. The engagement had been good, mostly. The first several months were easy. The planning had introduced friction, but I'd attributed that to the ordinary stress of coordinating something large and expensive. I had no reason not to. I want to be clear about that, because it matters later. I was not suspicious. I was not the paranoid type. I was not the kind of man who checked his partner's phone or tracked her location. I had never had a reason to be. What I became, eventually, was a man who had been handed enough evidence that ignoring it would have required active effort. But I'm getting ahead of myself. The weeks between that post and the moment everything collapsed didn't feel dramatic while they were happening. That's the thing about slow burns. They don't announce themselves. You don't sit down one evening and think, I am now in the suspicion phase of a betrayal. You just live your life with a low-level hum underneath it, a frequency that doesn't quite match everything else in the room. The Wednesday after the post, I came home to find Lindsay on the phone, laughing. Not a polite laugh, a full, easy, generous laugh, the kind she used to give me in the first year we dated. She saw me come in, and the laugh dropped a register immediately. Not gone, just different. She held up one finger, give me a second, and walked into the bedroom, pulling the door mostly shut. I went to the kitchen. I made dinner. She came out 12 minutes later, phone in her pocket, demeanor entirely normal. Who was that? I asked, not because I was suspicious yet, but because it was a reasonable question. Miranda, she said. Drama at her job. You know how she gets. I didn't know how Miranda got. This was plausible. I nodded and handed her a bowl. 2 weeks later, we had a meeting with the caterer, a Saturday afternoon session to finalize the menu. Lindsay was 20 minutes late, which wasn't unusual for her, but she arrived distracted in a way that was. She kept checking her phone under the table while the caterer described entree options. Once, she smiled at something on the screen before she caught herself and put the phone away entirely. Sorry, she said to the caterer. Work thing. The caterer nodded professionally and kept talking. I watched Lindsay reorder her expression into attentiveness. I said nothing. I answered questions about the salmon versus the chicken. I tasted a dessert sample and said it was excellent. At the venue walkthrough the following weekend, a final confirmation before the 30-day window that would lock in the full balance, Lindsay got a call she took outside. I stood near the window and watched her through the glass. She was animated, smiling. She turned away when she noticed me looking. The venue coordinator, a kind woman named Patricia, asked me if I wanted to see the cocktail hour space again. Sure, I said. That evening, Austin came over. We sat on the fire escape with beers, the way we used to before both of us had gotten serious with people, and I told him, carefully, without conclusions, what I'd been noticing. He was quiet for a moment. You think she's... I don't think anything yet, I said. But... I turned the bottle in my hand. Something's off. I can't prove it's anything. Austin looked at me for a second. He knows me well enough to understand that I don't say things like something's off without good reason. What are you going to do? Nothing, I said. For now. He nodded slowly. He understood that too. The Chicago trip happened the following week. Tuesday through Thursday, she said. Client presentation, she said. I had no reason to question it. She'd done Chicago twice already that year. I drove her to the airport Tuesday morning, kissed her goodbye, told her to text me when she landed. She texted me 2 hours later. Landed. Long flight. Tired. Going straight to the hotel. I texted back. Get some rest. Call me later? She called around 9. We talked for maybe 20 minutes. She sounded normal. Fine. A little flat, maybe, but she said she was tired. I believed her. Thursday, she came home looking good. Not tired at all. Rested, actually. A new silver bracelet on her wrist that I hadn't seen before. New bracelet. I asked. She glanced down at it. Found it in my bag. Forgot I had it. I smiled. Nice. The discovery was not dramatic. Discoveries rarely are, in my experience. About 10 days after the Chicago trip, I was looking through our joint bank account to reconcile some wedding expenses, deposits, vendor payments, that kind of thing. It was something we'd agreed to do together monthly, but Lindsay had been busy, so I was doing the initial pass on my own. There was a hotel charge I didn't recognize. Not on Lindsay's card, on mine. A charge from a hotel in Chicago for 2 nights, which would have been fine, except the hotel wasn't the one she'd told me she was staying at. The company always books her at a Marriott property near the client office. This was not a Marriott property. It was a boutique hotel downtown, billed at $340 a night. I sat with that for a long time. The most obvious explanation wasn't the only explanation. It was possible the company had changed hotels last minute. It was possible there'd been a booking issue. It was possible Lindsay had made a separate reservation for some reason I wasn't aware of and put it on the wrong card by accident. All of those things were possible. I didn't bring it up that night. I waited until the next evening, keeping everything easy and light in the interim, and then I mentioned it casually, the way you might mention any minor billing confusion. Hey, there's a hotel charge on my card from Chicago I don't recognize. Different hotel than your usual one. Do you know what that's about? She was at the kitchen counter, slicing an apple. She didn't look up immediately. Oh, she said. Yeah, there was a mix-up with the Marriott. Overbooked or something. They moved a few of us last minute. They moved you to a boutique hotel downtown. It was close to the client site. I nodded. Did they reimburse you? I submitted it. Should come through soon. She finished slicing the apple and brought it to the couch where she sat down and opened her laptop. The subject was closed, apparently. I went back to the kitchen. I rinsed a glass. I stood at the sink for a moment. The Marriott she always stayed at was a 10-minute walk from the client site. I knew this because she'd told me once, during an earlier trip, that she liked being able to walk in the morning. The boutique hotel was on the other side of downtown. I didn't say anything else about it. I went to the couch. I sat next to her. I watched 2 episodes of something neither of us was really paying attention to. That night, while she slept, I did something I had never done in 4 years. I picked up her phone. I wasn't proud of it. I want to be honest about that. I'm not someone who believes the ends justify the means in situations like this, and I'm not telling you this was the right thing to do. But the hotel was the wrong hotel, and the explanation didn't hold, and something in my chest had shifted into a frequency I could no longer ignore. The phone was locked with Face ID. Useless. I put it back. I lay there in the dark. The next morning, she forgot to close her laptop before she showered. I wasn't looking for anything. I walked past it to get water, and a thread was open in a messaging application. Not iMessage. Something else, a platform I recognized but that she'd never mentioned using. The preview was only 2 lines before the screen locked. I didn't get to read a full message. I caught a name. Bradley. And half a sentence before the screen went dark. Can't wait to see. I got my water. I sat down. I thought about that name for the rest of the day. I want to be clear about something before I explain what came next. I did not hire a private investigator. I did not install tracking software. I did not go through her email or her iCloud or any of the things that occupy a certain corner of the internet's imagination when people talk about catching cheaters. What I did was quieter than that and more methodical. I started with the name. Bradley is not an uncommon name, but the professional circles Lindsay moved in were specific enough that a search through LinkedIn, filtered by consulting, Chicago, and the time frame of her client work, produced 11 results. 4 were women. 2 were clearly too senior to be client-adjacent contacts. That left 5. Of those 5, 1 stood out. Bradley Hart, a senior VP at a firm Lindsay's company had done work for in the previous 18 months. His profile listed Chicago as his primary office location. His photo showed a man in his late 30s, well-dressed, the kind of face that looks expensive without being immediately handsome. I noted this. I did nothing with it yet. The Miami trip came up 2 weeks later. I drove her to the airport again. Same routine. She texted me when she landed. We spoke on the phone each evening. Everything felt normal, which itself had started to feel like a performance, though I couldn't be certain whether I was the audience or the actor. While she was in Miami, I did some careful review of the pattern we'd developed over the past several months. I cross-referenced her stated travel schedule with what I could verify through public sources, conference listings, LinkedIn activity, post timestamps on professional pages. I'm not going to walk through every step because some of it was painstaking and none of it was interesting to anyone who wasn't building a picture the way I was building one. Here is what the picture showed. In the 3 months prior, Lindsay had told me she was in Chicago for client work on 4 separate occasions. Her company's LinkedIn showed 1 post from Chicago in that period. Not 4. 1. The Miami trip she described as a solo client presentation. Bradley Hart's LinkedIn showed he'd given a keynote at a conference in Miami that same week. The Dallas overnight, the one she'd mentioned only in passing, corresponded with no client activity I could find for her company. There was also this. In February, Lindsay had mentioned a team dinner in Chicago that had run late, which was why she hadn't called me that evening. I had thought nothing of it at the time, but I remembered it now because she'd sent me a photo from the dinner, a wide-angle shot of a long table, her colleagues in frame, tagged at a well-known Chicago steakhouse. I pulled the photo up. I looked at it carefully for the first time with real attention. The metadata, visible through a basic photo property check, showed the image had been taken at 6:47 p.m. She hadn't texted me until after midnight to say dinner had run late. 6 hours. At a dinner she'd already photographed before 7. I looked at Bradley Hart's photo again. I thought about the boutique hotel on the other side of downtown from the Marriott. I thought about the silver bracelet she'd found in her bag. I thought about some do though and that small, satisfied emoji. I closed my laptop. I sat in silence for a long time. Austin came over that Saturday. I showed him what I'd found. Not all of it, just the outline. He sat across from me at the kitchen table and didn't say anything for a full minute when I finished. Then he said, "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to get confirmation," I said. "And then I'm going to make some decisions." "You're not going to confront her?" I looked at him. What would that accomplish? He didn't have an answer for that. The confirmation came the following week. I'm not going to detail how, exactly. It involved nothing illegal, nothing that required a third party, and nothing that gave me any satisfaction in the obtaining. What I will tell you is that by Wednesday of that week, I had a clear, documented timeline of Lindsay and Bradley meeting in 3 separate cities over 4 months, staying at the same hotels, at the same times, with a consistency that ruled out coincidence. There was also footage. I didn't go looking for it. It surfaced through a channel I hadn't expected, via a hotel security system that, as it turned out, had been the subject of an internal review for unrelated reasons. I won't explain further than that. The point is that it existed, and I had seen it, and there was no remaining version of this story in which Lindsay's explanation made any sense. I texted Austin one word, confirmed. He texted back, "I'm sorry, man." I put the phone down. I went to the window. I watched the street for a while. I felt, more than anything, very calm. This is the part people find surprising when they hear about it later. There was no confrontation. There was no conversation. There was no dramatic scene in which I laid everything on the table and watched her face fall. I had thought about that version, tried to picture it, and found that I didn't want it. Not because I was afraid of it, because it would have required her participation in something that was no longer hers to participate in. The decision had been made. What remained was logistics. I called the venue on a Thursday morning while Lindsay was at work. I spoke with Patricia, who had been kind to us throughout the planning process and was kind to me now, even as I explained that we needed to cancel. There was a conversation about what was refundable and what wasn't. I took notes. I thanked her. I called the florist next, then the caterer, then the photographer, who seemed more surprised than anyone and asked gently if everything was okay. I told her it was, and that I appreciated her time, and that I was sorry for any inconvenience. The honeymoon had been booked through a travel agency, a 10-day trip to Portugal that Lindsay had been excited about for months. I canceled it. Some of it came back. Most of it didn't. Over the next 4 days, I separated our finances as cleanly as I could without making a scene. I moved my direct deposit. I opened a new individual account. I removed myself as the primary on 2 of the vendor contracts that had been in my name and renegotiated the penalties where possible. The apartment was more complicated. The lease was joint. I spoke with our landlord, who was surprisingly understanding, and began laying the groundwork for what would need to happen. I didn't move out yet. I wasn't ready to give up the apartment, and I wasn't ready to have a conversation with Lindsay that would force me to explain why. During all of this, 5 days, maybe 6, Lindsay was still planning a wedding. She texted me a photo of centerpiece options on Friday. She forwarded an email from the band about the set list on Saturday. She mentioned, over dinner on Sunday, that her dress fitting was in 2 weeks and asked if my suit was ready. Almost, I said. I asked about her week. She told me. I listened. I ate my food. I behaved, as far as I was able to tell, exactly as I always had. The only thing different, from the outside, was nothing. I lay awake that night, not with grief or rage. Those had both passed through me quickly in the days after confirmation, like weather, but with something closer to clarity. There is a specific stillness that comes from having made a decision that cannot be unmade. I had been living in ambiguity for months. Now I wasn't. I thought about that post. Imagine marrying someone who still thinks love matters more than lifestyle. I thought about the $11,000 deposit on a venue I had now canceled. I thought about Portugal. I thought about 4 years and an engagement ring that had cost me 3 months of careful saving and the speech Austin had already written. I felt nothing that resembled regret about what I was doing. I want to be honest about that too. She found out about the venue first. Patricia, our coordinator, meticulous and professional, sent a cancellation confirmation to the joint email address Lindsay and I had created specifically for wedding correspondence. It was a small oversight on my part. I had forgotten we'd set that account up together, and she still checked it occasionally, mostly to forward things to vendors. I was at work when my phone rang. "What did you do?" Her voice was low and controlled in a way that meant the opposite of controlled. "I canceled the venue," I said. Silence. "Then why?" "Because I'm not marrying you." Another silence, longer this time. "I think you need to come home and explain yourself," she said. Each word landed carefully, the way you speak when you're trying very hard not to shout. "I'll be home at 6, I said. "We can talk then." When I came in that evening, she was in the living room, arms crossed, the kind of stillness that fills a room before something breaks. She had clearly been sitting there for hours. "The venue isn't the only cancellation," I said, before she could start. I set my bag down. I took off my jacket. I sat across from her. "The caterer, the florist, the photographer, the honeymoon. All of it. It's been handled." "What are you?" She stopped. Started again. "You've been doing this behind my back for how long?" I looked at her calmly. "About a week." "You owe me an explanation." "I do," I said. "And I'll give you one. I know about Bradley." The shift in her face was immediate and involuntary. The color, the set of her jaw, the brief failure of her eyes to hold contact. She recovered quickly. She was composed, in most situations. "I don't know what you think." "I'm not asking you to confirm it," I said. "I'm not here for a conversation about what you did or didn't do. I know what happened. I know the hotels. I know the dates. I know it started before the Dallas trip, and I know it was still ongoing during Miami." Her jaw tightened. "You've been spying on me." "I've been paying attention," I said. "There's a difference." She sat very still. "I'm going to need you to decide what you want to do about the apartment," I continued. "There are options. We don't need to figure that out tonight. But I'm going to need it figured out soon, because I can't keep living here indefinitely." "You're not even going to," she stopped again. "You're just going to sit there and be like this? What would you prefer?" She didn't answer. "I loved you," I said. "Not bitterly. Just as information. For a long time, I genuinely loved you, and I was planning a life with you. And you were wearing a bracelet he gave you and posting things about how I didn't understand what you were worth." I paused. "I think we both know how we got here." She looked at the floor. "There's one more thing," I said. "The hotel footage." She looked up. "Some hotels have internal reviews," I said, unrelated to anything either of us did. During one of those reviews, footage from a hotel in Chicago was pulled and seen by people who weren't looking for it specifically, but found it anyway. I don't know exactly how the chain of events goes from here, but I think you should be prepared for the possibility that people outside of this room learned things you would rather they didn't. I watched her understand what I was saying. "What footage?" she said quietly. I didn't answer, because I didn't need to. 3 days later, the footage began circulating. I don't know who sent it first. I don't think it matters. What I know is that Lindsay's family maintained a private group chat for major events and announcements, weddings, babies, holidays, the general business of a large extended family staying connected. Her brother Jeremy administered it. Tiffany was in it. Her parents were in it. Aunts, uncles, cousins who had already received save-the-dates and made travel arrangements. The footage was shared into that chat. I wasn't in the group. I found out from Austin, who found out from Jeremy, who called him because Jeremy didn't know what else to do and Austin was the only person he knew how to reach on my side. Austin called me while I was making coffee on a Tuesday morning. "It's in the family chat," he said. I set the coffee down. "Okay." Jeremy saw it. "Tiffany. Her parents." He paused. "Everyone, basically." "How's Jeremy taking it?" Austin exhaled. "Not well. He's been calling her. She's not picking up." He paused again. "He said he wants to call you. To apologize." "He doesn't have to do that." "He wants to," he said. I'm quoting. "Tell him we had no idea." I looked out the window. I know he didn't. The fallout, from what reached me through Austin and later through Jeremy directly, was significant in the way family fallouts tend to be, not loud and immediate, but deep and slow-moving, affecting the terrain of everything around it. Lindsay's mother had apparently been the one most visibly shaken. Her father had been quiet in a way Jeremy described as worse than shouting. Tiffany, who had commented "You deserve the world, babe" on the original post, had not spoken to Lindsay since the footage circulated. Bradley, by all accounts, disappeared. He had been careful, professionally. He had too much to lose. Lindsay had been, it seemed, a risk he was willing to take quietly and abandon immediately when the risk materialized. That's not a surprise. That's just who those people are. It's been almost 8 months now. I'm in a new apartment, mine alone, which feels accurate in a way the old one never quite did. It's smaller. I like it. There's a good coffee place on the corner, and I know the woman who works the Tuesday morning shift by name. Small things, but they're mine. I went back to work with the kind of focus that only arrives after something large and distracting is removed from your life. I was promoted in the fall. Austin, and I watch football on Sundays. I've been reading more. I sleep well. Jeremy reached out once, a few weeks after everything collapsed, with a long message I won't reproduce in full. The gist was that he was sorry, that his family had been wrong about some things they'd assumed, and that he hoped I was okay. I wrote back and told him I appreciated it, and that I held nothing against his family. I meant that. I haven't spoken to Lindsay. I don't plan to. I don't know what her life looks like now, and I realize that I don't particularly need to. The people who cared about her still care about her, probably. The people who believed her version of things may still believe it. None of that is my concern. What happened, happened. The record exists, separate from what either of us says about it. I think about the post sometimes. Imagine marrying someone who still thinks love matters more than lifestyle. I saw it differently then than I do now. Then, it landed like humiliation, public and deliberate, a thing said for an audience. Now, it reads more like a window. She was telling everyone who she was. I just wasn't ready to take her at her word. There's nothing left in me that resembles bitterness about any of it. That's not performance. That's just what happens when you go through something like this slowly and quietly instead of letting it explode. By the time the explosion came, I had already finished grieving. She planned a wedding she didn't intend to attend in any real way. I canceled it. And somewhere in a Chicago hotel's archived security footage, the truth had already been waiting, patient, indifferent, and entirely on time.